Hello everyone, and welcome back to this, our final lecture in our section on the truce and the treaty period. And as you can see, we're going to talk about the military split today, which is by far the most pivotal of all these divisions that we have. And as I mentioned at the end of the last lecture, don't worry too much about the various kind of constitutional issues, how confusing it all is, and De Valera's various sort of semantic twists and turns. I say it's going to be the military side and the military division, that's where all the running's going to be. And I'll show you here the division. So you get an equivalent division as you had with political division in terms of the military. And here we are here. This gives you an idea now of what the various divisions of the IRA and how they did and how they react to the treaty. And you'll see that the situation is overwhelmingly the majority of IRA volunteers are against the treaty. And this is particularly true, as you can see, in areas down here in Munster and so on. I mean, roughly speaking, the hardest fighting areas during the War of Independence tend to be the places that tend to be more anti-treaty. When it comes to the pro-treaty side, you can see really, aside from a few areas, and these tend to be people who are quite strongly linked to Michael Collins. So there's a bit in Dublin, obviously, where GHQ is, with Mulcahy and so on. A bit in the Midlands here, the 5th Northern under Owen O'Duffy, friend of Collins, quite an odious man in reality, considering his later political career as a leader of Ireland's fascists. 1st Midland Division under Saul McKeon, another friend of Collins. Up here in the 1st Northern, Joe Sweeney, again, another friend of Collins. Over here in the West, the 1st Western Division as well. So, I say there's bits and pieces of pro-treaty support amongst the IRA, but I mean, overwhelmingly, the real tough, hard fighters, as it were. And you'll notice, those who are kind of further away from GHQ in Dublin, the more anti-treaty they tend to be. What you've got over here, by the way, just to mention this in terms of the 1st Western, a lot of this is personal. So what you've got basically is I mentioned these kind of warlords you get in these various areas, and you've got families, you've got the Barretts and the Brennans, and one side goes anti-treaty. So the other side, who don't like it, they don't like each other, these families, almost decide, well, we're not going to join them, so we'll go pro-treaty. So the commitment, there isn't a great ideological commitment in that sense to why they choose that particular side. But I say that's the big thing about this. All these, it's the experienced veteran hardcore of the IRA. Roughly 2/3 to 3/4, you'd say, of the IRA go anti-treaty. Which makes, of course, this kind of propaganda, which I'll show you here, this is provisional government free state propaganda, trying to make the point that when the War of Independence was on, the people who are now fighting in the Civil War were hiding under their bed. That's nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the opposite is actually the case. So I say that's going to be the split. The character of this, what this actually looks like on the ground. And you're talking about, I say, personal resentments towards, I say, Dublin from the provinces, and what did you actually do during the war, and there's all these kind of things. But it's kind of interesting in that, I mean, some counties, and I think I mentioned Sligo. Sorry, I'll just go back here. I think I mentioned Sligo, which is up there in the northwest, just below the 1st Northern Division, which does very little in the War of Independence. But, well, when we get to the actual split, the Civil War split, is very anti-treaty. I mean, virulently anti-treaty. As we said, so is it this because there's different timelines in terms of how these counties are developing and how their troops are, being trained and equipped, and they're only ready to fight at certain points. But yeah, so all kinds of new enemies, as it were, new centres of opposition are formed during the Civil War. But I say that's roughly gives you a rough idea, and we'll talk more about the North in a whole separate section to explain, let's say, that kind of how northern and the Northern IRA react to this whole thing. So I say, now what happens is with the IRA is the big moment comes, rather like what De Valera's done, as it were, walking out of the Dáil, is that they now move to establish their own independent army convention. And they do this in March 1922. They hadn't had an army convention since, 1918. But now they've decided they're going to set up their own executive. Now, this is banned by GHQ, of course. Mulcahy tries to stop this happening because he knows how dominant anti-treaty Republicans are going to be in this new body. But they carry on anyway. They go on regardless. And what they do at this convention is they reaffirm their commitment to the Republic as established in 1916. They elect an executive and also a new chief of staff in the shape of Liam Lynch. And you'll see Liam Lynch sitting there, fourth from the left on the front row with his leg crossed. And he will be the chief of staff of this new IRA executive. So a sort of independent body has now been formed, a military independent army almost, which answers to who? Well, no one. It answers to itself. It's a very worrying development, as it were, the creation of private armies in the midst of this treaty. And you'll see here, there are various attempts going to be made throughout this to hold the army together. And it's a lovely picture, this, because it just gives you all the various pro-treaty and anti-treaty sides. And they're constantly meeting. There's attempts through the IRB to try and bring them together, because many of them in the IRB as well, and we're going to hold these bonds. And that's going to drag on and on and on. Ultimately, it's going to be fruitless. But I say they're some of the key, movers and shakers in terms of the leadership of this rapidly sort of dividing army. Now, you do get a similar kind of political change as well. The image, of maintaining the unity of Sinn Féin and maintaining the Dáil government and the Dáil, these again are largely symbolic. As I say, the provisional government is what's making all the running. Now, that's all the money, of course, is going to come. When the treaty's signed and agreed, and they're going to be recognised, most importantly, by the British as the government, the legitimate government of Ireland. So the Dáil is going to kind of wither away. But at the same kind of time the executive is founded, Eamon de Valera does go on and found his own political party, the Party of the Republic, as you can see in March. And this is the anti-treaty TDs now who stormed out of the Dáil with de Valera. And as I say, they found their own party. Again, not that going to be that relevant. It won't last very long, this, but I suppose it's something that had to be done in a way to create an opposition political kind of base. But as I say, during the war, we'll see politically largely irrelevant, someone like de Valera. Collins himself, of course, and there's a reason why this war isn't going to break out straight away, because Collins, along with other people, are desperate to avoid a cleavage and violence breaking out. And he's going to try all kinds of ways, as I say, to try and hold everything together, to search for some kind of compromise. And we'll see this when we talk about the North. I mean, when his attempt now to, as it were, turn attention to the North now, to say, to Republicans, why don't we have a shared crusade now to bring down the Northern government? This focus on partition suddenly comes out of nowhere. So a kind of idea of averting a war in the South by starting one in the North. And we'll talk about that again, as I say, in a separate section. So during this period, this spring and early summer, numbers of IRA units are going to head up to the North, and almost to distract them, as a unifying kind of crusade. But I say all the time now, the Constitution's steadily getting written, the treaty's getting written into the Constitution, and I say, there is a kind of subtle power shift that's going on. What makes things worse is that on the ground, the military situation is polarizing alarmingly. And I say, with Provincial Ireland now, huge parts of Provincial Ireland now, just not under any kind of government control, essentially under control of the IRA and these various commanders and so on. One thing that happens is, when it comes to law and order, of course, is the RIC is now disbanded. The RIC gets disbanded in the spring, and by March, they're all these. I mean, they'll be glad to get out of the RIC because there's going to be a new police force, of course. So they're being disbanded, and they all go to the Curragh, and they all, get their pensions and so on. They're beginning to disappear. They have no, waiting for this new police. As we mentioned this with Ulster, didn't we? The RUC is going to come into place. The RIC in the south, we're going to get a new police force as well. But it doesn't help that there's this vacuum now opens up. Perhaps most alarmingly, of course, the British are leaving. The British garrison begin to leave now in large numbers from the spring of 1922 onwards. And what they've done once the treaty's signed is they've gathered in various big barracks, urban barracks or barracks at ports and so on, major cities, ready to get out. The first unit which actually leaves on the evening of the 20th of January 1922. So get out as soon as you possibly can. And I'll show you here, I just found this nice little film here. A little news clip, if I can just put it on here, of the British leaving. Just a couple of minutes. I'll just stick this on so you can see some of the scenes. So the British are going to be, as I say, they're going to be leaving in quite hastily. I'll give you an idea of this. I mean, by the end of February, the 14 counties of Ireland are already empty of British troops. And here is General Mulcahy. You can see him there putting up, this is the little goodbye, putting up the new flag of this independent Irish state. And there it is going up the flagpole. And they'll have a little kind of ceremony now where lots of salutes and the British march past and so on. But they want to get out. That's the fact. They want to get out. They've had a miserable time, as you can imagine, as the RIC have. They just want to leave now, and they get themselves out very, very quickly. As General Macready, of course, is Commander-in-Chief in Ireland of British forces in Ireland, has overseen this British campaign. Not too successfully, you'd have to say, but there he is now, leaving. And then what you end up with now is these scenes, as you can see here, of the send-off. These are all British troops now leaving Ireland, going to the ships. Now, you can see there isn't a great deal of animosity as they leave, because peace has been declared and so on, and a lot of people are saying, well, they're leaving now. It's all over there. They are on the ships now, hanging over the edge of the ships, and off they go to Britain. So, I say, but they're going and getting out as quickly as possible. Now, what's crucial about all this, and let me just move this on here, and this is the problem. The British themselves, when they leave, of course, who do they leave their barracks to and local power to? Well, what they're obviously going to do is leave it to the local IRA commander, whoever that might be, and they hand over the keys to the barracks. You can see here, and this is IRA men now at what would have been a British barracks. It's now been evacuated. There you go, you take that over. You seem to be the authority here. And kind of innocently, from the British point of view, they hand over the keys, as it were, to whoever's in charge in that local area. And they don't seem to have any understanding of the fact that most of the IRA are actually anti-treaty, anti the government. They're handing over power essentially locally now to people who want to bring down the treaty and bring down the peace. And that's going to be a big issue. It means, therefore, that they now increasingly control the country. And I say, without a power vacuum now in these areas, without a police force, with no British military and so on. And remember, these are volunteers. They're going to start commandeering things. They're going to be walking around the streets now. They're in charge. This means that Ireland is beginning in this period on the ground to slip into anarchy. So, you can sit in Dublin and make as many proclamations as you want and speeches and things like that. The reality is that provincial Ireland is, as I say, is out with the control of the Dublin government. Now, you do get in certain areas, and this is particularly, we mentioned the Western Division there, as a pro-treaty force, this kind of little island of pro-treaty in the west of Ireland. In certain key places, one of these is Limerick, the city of Limerick. And you'll know if you've ever been to Limerick, they have a big river there, Shannon, going through it. And you can see it's a very important river crossing, strategically speaking. So holding on to Limerick is going to be very important. So you get a number of kind of standoffs developing. Not open war yet, but a number of standoffs. And here we go. Here's some anti-treaty IRA in Limerick. You can see they would have taken over this hotel. They're usually at one end of the street, the pro-treaty side at the other end. And I say a bit of tension, a few fisticuffs, a bit of pushing and shoving back and forth, but that's as far as it goes at the minute. So they avoid open confrontation. So Liam Lynch will get involved, Mulcahy and him get involved. The last sort of dregs of their IRB alliance manages to avoid an explosion of violence in March, but it's absolutely coming. So increasing tension, increasing chaos, basically on the ground. The number of Republican bank raids, for example, increases. The IRA are looking for money to buy weapons and fund their volunteers and so on. There are certainly some killings increasingly as we go into May, and I say low-level acts of intimidation and beatings, but generally this kind of growing atmosphere of anarchy and kind of chaos. And particular targets in this period are perceived to be prominent pro-treaty supporters in various areas. And again, I'll just show you here. There's another little newsreel I found, which I thought you might find interesting. And if I can just move it on, here we are. And this is Arthur Griffith now. If I can just get this to operate. Here we go. Yes, this is Arthur Griffith now. Arthur Griffith goes to Sligo, of all places, which is the Wild West in this period, to make a speech and so on. I'm not afraid of provincial Ireland, and and he goes out there. And when he goes to Sligo, apparently shots are actually fired at him from the crowd. Someone's got a revolver, and there's a scatter, and there's kind of chaos. And he has to hightail it back very quickly to Dublin. So you'll see here, these guys in the uniform are the beginnings of the Provisional Government Free State Army, which you saw Mulcahy wearing similar uniforms now. The roads have been blocked by the anti-treaty IRA, so they're having to chop them down now. And I say it's a very, very tense situation. I'll just wind this on actually till we get some of these images now. So there we go. So these will be pro-treaty. I haven't got a uniform yet, but these will be pro-treaty members of the IRA there to, as it were, protect Griffiths. But yeah, this is a very, very kind of tense situation that's developing. And I say Griffiths, you can imagine Griffith, he's a wonderful character, Griffith. He can, I'm going to go and make a speech, and I'll talk to the people. We'll absolutely be fine. It doesn't happen at all. Here is Griffith, by the way. You can see the swagger of Griffith. Yes, I'm not afraid of this. Well, he will be afraid quite quickly, as will many other prominent people. There's Michael Collins. And there he is. So again, these are we in Dublin. So I say, just to give you there, just a little glimpse, as it were, into the growing kind of tension that you're getting. Now, this is De Valera. So these are images from the earlier the earlier treaty debates there. And you can see these are the kind of speeches that are being made in local kind of areas now for one side or the other. Yeah, but that just gives you an idea of the kind of atmosphere that you've got in provincial Ireland. Lots of roadblocks, lots of tension, and so on. So everything's ratcheting up now, and this is not helped particularly in March, this very pivotal month of March, when Eamon de Valera himself makes this infamous speech here, the so-called Rivers of Blood speech. Now, very confrontational rhetoric, and the fact he talks about if they want this treaty, they'll have to wade through Irish blood. Now, I think this is, to be fair, often misunderstood, this as some kind of incitement to violence. I don't think it is that, to be fair. it's essentially a warning against civil war. It's saying we need to come to some, we need to tear up this treaty and reunify the movement. Otherwise, we're going to end up with this Irish blood and so on. But it doesn't help. Certainly, the choice of language is a rather unhelpful turn of phrase considering the tension. You'll notice here, by the way, in the picture, just to mention, I mentioned these women, the silent figures of these women. You'll notice there, I think that's Patrick Pearse's mother. But you can see she'll just sit there in black, say nothing, but she's a stamp of approval now for the speaker. I say a lot of this kind of business goes on. Now, I say so confrontation tension is growing, but what you would say, and here's a very important point, time is not on the Republican side, on the IRA side, because the old Doyle government's disappearing, and the provisional government now is getting real power. New ministries are being set up all the time. A new kind of the old counter state, the old Doyle courts, they're all being phased out now. A new provisional government army is going to be created out of this sort of embryonic, very small part of the pro-treaty IRA. And again, this month of March is followed by a very dramatic escalation in terms of this in April. April 1922, Rory O'Connor with 200 IRA men now take over the Four Courts building in the centre of Dublin. If you've ever been to Dublin, you'll know that's on the river. It's a beautiful big building, and set themselves up now. This is the new executive IRA headquarters. So this is no longer in Sligo or Cork or whatever. Now they're coming right into the heart of this new infant embryonic government. And they don't just stay there. They take over lots of other buildings in the city. Rather like Easter Rising in many ways. They take over lots of buildings and then swagger about the streets, and they start commandeering things. And who's going to stop them? That's the problem. There is no police force. There is no army and so on. It adds to the tension, adds to the kind of the growing kind of confrontation. So the military side of the movement the split is radicalizing, but meanwhile the political side of the movement have an issue in the sense that there's an election coming up. Elections are going to be held in May, as we said, like in the North. You have to ratify the agreement, and what they do is, in order to hold together this Sinn Féin movement, is they come up with an electoral pact. So rather than two different political parties, they actually keep the name Sinn Féin, but what they do is they apportion out the candidates to reflect the 64-57 split, meaning that the election is essentially a stitch-up between both pro-treaty and anti-treaty sides. So the point is that everyone's going to most people are going to vote sort of Sinn Féin. But if you do vote Sinn Féin in your area, you'll only maybe have an anti-treaty candidate. Even if you agree with the treaty, you'll have to vote for the anti-treaty guy. He's the official Sinn Féin candidate. So that's the kind of trick they're pulling. It's very shady, and the British aren't particularly happy about all this kind of stuff. Now, what's going to happen is, and this is again a big moment politically, which is going to draw this whole thing apart. Michael Collins is going to come out now and make a very famous speech. So by the time we get to these elections, which eventually will be, so they're promulgated kind of in May, and then in June they're actually going to happen. Michael Collins makes a very famous speech, as you can see at Clonakilty, and he comes out and says that everyone in this election, this is a free election, and everyone should vote however their conscience dictates. So vote for whatever party is for peace and for the treaty, regardless now. And this is very devious, very clever, because he leaves it right until the last minute now before this election. So vote for whoever you want. Don't, if you don't agree with the treaty, don't vote for the Sinn Féin anti-treaty guy. Vote for whoever, the Labour Party or whoever it might be, whatever party is going to support the treaty, vote for them. And this, of course, this news immediately fires around the press and so on, and it has the desired effect, or enough of effect now to make it very clear there is a mandate now for this treaty. And I'll show you, here is the result of the so-called pact election in June. And you can see Sinn Féin now, pro-treaty Sinn Féin, clearly win the majority of the seats. And you can see the Labour Party, for example, which itself is pro-treaty, so is the Farmers' Party, so this Businessman's Party, and so on. And so a number of these independents, they're pro-treaty people. So people obviously have voted Labour instead of voting for the Sinn Féin guy who's anti-treaty. So it's a very devious by Collins. And you can see essentially what's happened is that the Sinn Féin, anti-treaty Sinn Féin, have won 36 seats to whatever it is, combined 85 or something. It's an absolutely clear mandate now politically for the treaty. No doubt about it. And only 2 weeks later now, this whole situation is going to collapse into actually armed conflict and civil war. So you can see the army's divided now into two different bodies. There's been an attempt to hold things together politically, but Collins scuppers that whole thing. And now you've got a mandate. The question is for Collins and you know, Griffith and people in the provisional government cabinet is, you know, we've got to, but the people have told us now they want the treaty. What are we going to do? We have to do something. Surely we have to assert our authority now. And of course, remember, the British are also saying, well, you've had the election now, the treaty's been passed by the Dáil, and now it's been passed by the people. Time to, you know, put up or shut up. You've got to assert your authority over this state. And I say that pressure is going to grow, and within 2 weeks, we're going to be with the outbreak of civil war now. And what we'll do, I say, when we talk about the civil war in a coming section, is we'll talk about that final week or so when this division kind of grows, leading, and we'll talk about the final path to civil war before we move on to talk about the conflict itself. Okay, my friends, so I'll see you all next time. Take care.